Perry Mason, did you see all his notes? Go ahead.
Things were starting to get a little bad. I was afraid we might not really be able to meet our own bills. Because, my wife, she kind of pushed me back in the back, and Mr. Woods, he's so far behind on payments. Margaret and I were really getting to be quite desperate to be paid, and might have to do something about it.
Whenever Richard came in for his haircut, he never talked. I think he remembered that I had been pursuing Catherine when we were at school. I always made sure I thinned his hair too much and cut it so that it didn't suit him. I loathed him. Sometimes I deliberately nipped him with one of my blades when I was shaving.
I decided to hire a gunman called Red Eye Mitchell to help me stop Richard from convicting poor Eddie. I knew that Richard was probably only using Eddie as a means to get at me anyhow.
Sometimes Annabelle would tell me if she saw Joe. He always used to ask after me and to send his regards to me via Annabelle.
I'm worried I've been so good and I've tried not to get into any trouble. And now this. Mr. Richard wanted to have me lynched to set an example to my people and have learned to bad doers. I have been praying to God to save me, and Susie's been praying too.
I told that Mr. Woods I didn't like his attitude, and he threatened to have us run out of town if I caused any trouble.
After a few weeks of searching, I was very lucky to find employment with Frank. He was a much fairer boss than Mr. Woods, and I got to see Eddie more often because he works there too. Frank always praises Eddie. He says he has been a good, honest worker, one of the best in fact.
I cried many tears at night when I am alone, and I think about how miserable my life is.
Next one?
Just read the one you just did.
It didn't go in place.
It's okay.
I just read it, so I'll read the next one.
Read it out loud.
Hey, Mom, Roman didn't read all his part. He skipped the sentence.
Okay, go ahead.
After this is one of the best in fact, but I do miss not being able to talk to anyone.
Daddy told Luke he wanted him to leave our place and never talk to me again. I cried and cried. Played with Daddy, but he would not back down.
I would really like to work in the city now that I know how to sing. Once I asked Richard if he would help me go to the city. He got angry and said I was ungrateful and wanted and didn't. Sorry. He got angry and said I was ungrateful for wanting to leave him.
That's it.
Springleaf told me that Mr. Woods treated her badly one morning. I promised Springleaf that Mr. Woods would pay for pay for this, and because his parents killed our parents.
I was a bit worried when Frank decided to hire a gunman. I was not used to having men of that sort in the place. It
all about Andy and how he loved her. He told me that he'd been given the sack by Richard, but Frank, his new boss, was going to make him the manager soon.
Red Eye is the meanest dude I've ever met. My maid trouble every time she has to suck her
The next day in town, Annabelle met Joe in the park and she told him what happened about having to get rid of Luke and him having to go work for Mr. Frank. And he said that someday he'd see to it that my husband got what he deserved for treating his family the way he does.
I was really pleased when Mr. Frank said he would stand by me, and then he employed Red Eye Mitchell to help.
Frank says I have a lot of potential. He has taught me how to keep the books and the basic management skills. He says he's grooming me to take over for him someday. Since I saved his life when he fell off a horse crossing the river, he has also promised that when he dies, his property will be mine.
When I heard of the gunslinger that had come to save Eddie, I wanted to see him, so I searched for him in town. When I was there to get supplies, you can imagine my delight when I recognized my long-lost friend, Red Eyes the Sun.
What are you doing, Dad?
Look at me.
Luke had often told me about his friend Eddie and Daddy picked on Eddie. I told him that Eddie wouldn't have killed his cattle, but Eddie was a good man. That just seemed to make Daddy more determined to get Eddie in trouble.
Richard stopped giving me money and gifts. I was having trouble surviving.
Brinley, should we wait for her?
Go ahead.
Brinley told me of her friendship with Annabelle and how Annabelle was being hurt in the heart by her father.
I saw Annabelle in the park, and I could tell Richard was making her life a misery. I made my blood boil, and I promised Annabelle that someday I'd find a way to get Richard out of her life.
When Luke came to work for me, I had to take him on partly to please Annabelle, but he turned out to be a splendid boy, a great worker and a very intelligent as well.
When Richard accused Eddie of killing his cattle, I knew he was wrong. I told him so, but he wouldn't listen, and he told me it was none of my business. Act 3.
Second.
Done. Remember, Demo.
No, let's start reading before we move.
On the night before the murder, Mr. Woods told Annabelle that she must marry Harold Edgar. I remembered him because he had taken the liberty of patting me on the head like one pats a pony. He was an arrogant man and big like a buffalo. Ooh, he was big.
When I heard about Mr. Wood's plan to hang Eddie for a crime he didn't do, I knew it was just because he hates blacks, especially blacks that work for Frank. I told Frank that it was so unfair and he agreed to employ Red Eye Mitchell to help save Eddie's life.
Yesterday I heard that Mr. Richard was forcing the sheriff to agree that he was threatening to get the sheriff sacked if he didn't lynch me.
know men like him. They have lots and mighty small towns like this one, and I don't know what to do.
On the note for the martyr, Daddy and I called you because he wanted me to marry him. Him. He was so ugly. I feel pleased just looking at him.
One of the girls told me how Richard had been talking to one of the new dancers in town, and that he was thinking of supporting her instead of me. I knew then that all the sweet things he'd said to me were nothing but sour lemons.
On the morning of the murder, yes, I admit, I decided to ride out to Richard's place to try to reason this whole Eddie case out with him. But as you'd expect, I didn't get very far because Richard was very stubborn. Because of the supplement business, I went alone to see Woods rather than with a deputy, as I usually do.
Frank had told me you'd wanted me to wait until something happened, but I was getting restless and just sitting around.
Whenever Richard was on one of his long trips, Catherine would get out the gun and practice her skills by trying to shoot the acorns off the oak tree. She said she always get enough to make the squirrels go hungry for the winter.
We were on the border of bankruptcy because of his bills and our creditors. Our creditors were getting very angry with us. We still insistent to give him more credit. And I thought it might be time to do something.
I heard that Richard was trying to arrange a marriage between Annabelle and that Hal Edgar, the new lawyer in town. He wanted to kiss that tombstone tooth of Harold. First thing in the morning, I knew Annabelle would never come to love her. Richard was coming to town this morning to find out Harold's answer when he was killed.
Recently I fell off my horse when we were crossing the river, which was flowing really hard. Luke dived in and saved my life and risked his own life in the process.
On the night before the murder, Richard came home early from town where he had been watching that dancing Lulu Peachy. And Annabelle and I were still playing cards. He came in and told Annabelle that she would have to marry Harold Edgar, the new young lawyer in town.
I still see Annabelle when she rides over secretly to visit Frank and I.
Annabelle came to my room after she had been told she had to marry horrible Harold. She sobbed and sobbed on her shoulder.
Oh, poor Larry, what about that?
I was worried because if Sheriff Clyde and his 7 deputies were on Mr. Richard's side, they would outnumber Mr. Frank and Red Eye. I would hate for Mr. Frank or Mr. Red Eye to get killed for my sake. Lulu told me Mr. Woods isn't giving her money anymore, or gifts. I would like to help her out, but we're broke.
Daddy knows my tears and just told me that Mommy ain't gonna sleep. But if I didn't behave myself and marry Harold, he would take his anger out on my mother for the rest of her days. I barged in to do to get money, but she knows me so well. But he just laughed at me.
has a gun, and I know where he keeps it. He also has a few horses tied up out back.
When I got near Wood's house, I saw a person in the distance. I think you'd call it one of those apparition or things. I saw this person up on the ridge. I could not make out who it was.
Go ahead.
Springley snuck over one night and told me Mr. Woods had threatened to make Mary, or Annabelle marry a man she hated.
When they found Mr. Wood's body, he was lying face down in the mud by the river. The person who killed him shot him in the back.
When Mr. Wood was found, there was a note in his pocket saying that the river came down overnight. No, it is possible to cross at the canyon. The note is not signed.
The more I thought about Sue Annabelle having to marry that other egg-headed Harold Edgar, who never talks about people and feelings only, laws and regulations, the more I worked up I become.
I have decided to make Luke a manager soon so that I can take it a bit easier. I have also changed my will so that he will get the other half of my property. Annabelle will still get the rest.
Annabelle burst into tears when she was told she had to marry Harold because she doesn't like him. He's so intellectual, she doesn't even understand half of what that man says. And he's so ugly with warts on his face bigger than bullet holes.
This morning when Annabelle rode over and told me what had happened, I was furious. It just didn't seem fair that Mr. Woods would make her marry that worldly weasel, horrible Harold Edgar.
After Annabelle had told me of her split, I felt had to do something. So I rode over to see Red as the sun. I told him everything. We talked all night long.
I must admit that in my Indian eyes,
Oh, sorry.
Springleaf is one of the loveliest women I ever laid eyes on.
Oh, Annabelle. Lulu. Competition for
On the
spring.
morning of the murder, I was out rounding up cattle by myself in our far had our 4 parrot borders into the canyon. On one side, I saw Mr. Richard heading for the river.
On the morning of the murder, Lou told me Mr. Woods was coming to town. We were closed because we don't open on the weekend.
Count.
He would get here and take his offer to marry had been accepted. And then he would bring him back to the house for a celebration lunch. He told me to dress up for it. But I really didn't want to. I think I'm really gonna cry again.
On the night before the murder, Richard had told me he planned to have poor Eddie hanged. I burst into tears. Richard also told me that he was going to town tomorrow morning to tell Harold Edgar he could marry his daughter.
I told that Mr. Woods. But no, he had that crazy look in his eye. He had to come to town, but I told him the river was getting high because of all the rain we had. And it was getting impossible to cross. But he did it anyway.
They were probably up on one of the cliffs of the road as it crossed the river. Mr. Woods had to get off his horse to cross the river, and that would have made him an easy target.
Springley stayed with me the rest of the night talking. When she left me in the morning, I promised her I'd take care of Mr. Woods and that she could come with me when I left town. She said she knew that Mr. Woods would no longer be a problem and that I should not worry about him.
After Annabelle left, I asked Red Eye Mitchell what he would do if he were me. He said that I would kill that evil man.
Just really think I should say more at this particular time.
The morning of the murder was Saturday, so I didn't have to worry. I had arranged to ride out Frank's for a little bit.
Early on the morning of the murder, Annabelle rode over and told me that her father was forcing her to marry the ugliest man in town. She was in tears and looked as if she was barely slept at all. My heart went out to her.
I slept in the spare room where I usually do these days, and in the morning we had breakfast in silence. Springleaf wasn't there because it was her day off, so I served the meal. Annabelle wasn't there. She had gotten up early and gone for a ride.
I also saw someone riding along off the cliff, but I couldn't make out who it was.
I was really worried about my husband's ulcer. He's not a well man. I knew it would be the size of a grain shed with all this worry, and he could die from it.
Yes, my ulcer has been quite great. I can't take too much stress. Having gunslingers like you around, Red Eye, certainly doesn't help any.
When I told Duke that he should kill me, I didn't think he would have the courage to do it, though I must admit, courage is a strange emotion. Some people can do things when they're really angry that they would never have thought of doing.
Red as the sun was so kind to me. I would like to be with him all the time. Red as the sun told me that he would like to go away with me and marry me and settle somewhere.
I didn't want to see Daddy in the morning, so I got up early and went for a ride on my horse. I didn't come back until noon. And as y'all know, I always carry a shotgun with me when I go riding, just for protection and all.
I have had my days free to do as I wanted, and on the morning of the murder, I left the hotel.
When I got down there to the river, I found poor Mr. Richard Woods lying face down. That 200-pound body was still warm, and it was sinking fast. He's making his own crater in the mud.
Anybody else have number 4?
I'll have number 4.
I did mine already.
Read number 4 again.
I was really worried about my husband's ulcer.
Uncle, do you have a number 4?
Do you have number 5?
Uncle, do you have a number 4?
I've got 4.
Okay, read 4.
I've got 4, but I can't read much.
Okay.
I may be a barber, but that doesn't shoot, as well as the rest of them. Sometimes I have to bring out my gun when the men don't want to pay for their haircuts.
Luke was also there at the time. He would stop her father and that he would make sure that she got to marry him. She smiled and cheered up a bit, but I think she wasn't sure if Luke would be able to carry it out. She knew how determined her father was.
At 8 a.m. he got on his horse and he said he's going to round up some cattle in the bottom paddock, and then he'd be heading to town to tell Harold the good news.
I had my gun with me. I was carrying it around herding up cattle in case a rattler comes for me when I'm having a break.
I rode my horse out to see if I could try and meet up with Mr. Woods and discuss his account with him in private.
I wish you wouldn't go and do these dangerous things without accepting the murder. What if Mr. Woods had decided to get you or something? Yeah, he was bad tempered and all. You really shouldn't take too many risks with a man like that.
Frank had given me the day off to go to town to see some friends.
In the morning, I did not go back to the ranch as it was my day off, and I wanted to see the day dawn with red as the sun.
Harold Eggert had told me that he would like to sponsor me. Harold had lots of money and has only married Annabelle for appearance sake. He preferred to spend his nights watching me dance than watch Annabelle do tapestry.
Uncle, do you have a five?
Now that Catherine is widowed, I intend to marry her. Maybe we'll have a double wedding with Luke and Annabelle.
Annabelle told me her father was going to ride into town that morning.
After Richard left, a rattlesnake came up by the house, and I got the gun out and shot it. I don't know where the gun is now. One of those farm hands must have taken it. Okay, we're going for a dessert intermission. It's time to consider who did what.